Chapter 8. Breaking Camp. We walked for days, sometimes rushing, other times slinking with the sound of hunters behind us. It was strange to be prey and hard to accept the staggering pace of our escape. I think the sun rose 4 times before we reached the Rhine. It was hard to be sure of anything with half the world stolen from me and the pounding in my head. The river ran cold and deep. Ice from the coming thaw rolled under its black surface. It coiled like a thick black snake, shedding pale scales as it went. Most of the week was gone before we found a way across that forbidding serpent. We hid half a day outside a small settlement of fishermen, and at night we crept in to steal their boat. There was no way of knowing the reception we would have had in that place had we revealed ourselves. Marcus snuck past their small fires with naked steel in his hand, but no one marked him, and he was able to slip the moorings and float one of their small boats downriver to where we waited. All the while, CX ran his fingers through my matted fur and murmured of home. His wounds smelt rank and sour. Once he had returned, Marcus was all for striking out for the other bank, but CX was still lucid enough to argue the danger of crossing the ice-strewn flood in darkness. At first light, Marcus packed the furs tightly around CX, but the covers had little effect on the chill that had gripped him. CX was wasted and paler than the overcast skies above us. I sat unhappily in the stern of our tiny craft looking down into the rolling water. "I've no coin to pay the ferryman," CX said weakly as Marcus lowered him into the boat. "I hope Renus is in a jovial mood today, else I pity him at having to bear such a poor comedian on his back," Marcus replied. He stared hard at the waters as if he could indeed gauge the river god's mood. Then he stepped into the small craft. The boat bobbed about and I felt a terrible lurching in my stomach. My nose dipped close to the dark rolling water. "To hate with him," CX cried. He looked over the watery abyss without fear. "I doubt it could be much colder in his bosom than it is out here in the air." Marcus settled himself and the rocking of the boat subsided. He forced the paddle through the water, then shifted his weight for a stroke on the other side. The Stygian river rose dangerously high up the hull of our overloaded boat. "Best not tempt him further, my friend," Marcus warned. His oar entered the water on the other side and ice thudded against the thin wood. "Am I, Marcus?" CX's voice was weak. "Are you what?" Marcus didn't take his eyes from the river. "Your friend." "I find it hard to tell sometimes, but you're like that with everyone, aren't you?" CX coughed again. You would say if you didn't appreciate my humor." "Would it really be that simple to get you to shut up?" Marcus asked. "You should have told me sooner." His lip quirked. "Don't worry, friend. Some fools I suffer gladly." The oar slid through the dark water and we lurched forward unevenly. To our left, a bird took off from the reeds on the opposite bank. "A heron," CX murmured. "Will it take my soul, or does Cerberus have the first claim?" I whined as the pale man turned his eyes on me, then glanced back at the water. The heron was still climbing, a dark spot against the sky. "Not that bird, then," CX mused. "I just hope to Jove it's not a Strix that comes for me. My mother used to say they would. You be good or the Strix will come and eat you up. Syrinx, my little kingfisher," she used to say. "Syrinx?" "Yes." "If you die, would you object to me using your tongue for a coin purse?" Before CX could reply, Marcus added, "I ask because your tongue must be the best worked piece of leather in the whole empire." CX's eyes widened slightly. Did Marcus Atratinus just try to tell a joke? "Perhaps I am in heaven already, which is exactly where the aforementioned organ has taken more than one fine maid." CX's tired eyes narrowed. "I'd certainly not give such a valuable thing away. Why, it must be worth silver at least." "You ask for silver, yet offer proof that silence is golden," Marcus observed mildly as he paddled. A spot of colour returned to CX's cheek. "Such an insult requires the most drastic revenge." He pushed himself up slightly, wincing as he did it. "I shall live, and no coin shall buy my silence." Marcus chuckled. "Even had you died, I expected you to be a noisy ghost, my friend." Once the crossing was made, Marcus fashioned another litter and we started to plod down the river bank. Dusk was descending when we came in sight of the fort at Mogontiacum. Fires flickered in the civilian settlement on the encampment's flank. Boats bobbed on the river beyond that, and as we got closer the sentries and the guard towers became clear. Marcus's shoulders slumped at the sight of the camp, and his feet that had plodded mechanically for so many miles began to falter. "We're nearly there, CX, my master promised." There was no reply from the man on the litter. We walked through the settlement unmolested. The traders and whores had better things to do than bother us. We moved amongst them like ghosts, neither acknowledged nor hindered, a wretched man and his dog dragging a sled of furs. The sword at Marcus's hip no doubt served to cement their indifference. "Halt!" A sentry barked, and we came to a sudden stop a few meters from the fort's gates. My master stared at the man in front of him for a second before he spoke, his voice cracking. "I'm Marcus Atratinus, here to make my report to Lieutenant General Gaius Sil—" Marcus opened his mouth to say more, but he suddenly lurched forward, forcing the sentry to drop his spear and shield in order to catch him. The young soldier looked down at Marcus as he tried to right himself. "Apologies," my master managed. "I have been long on the road, and the burden was not light." Mentioning Ceyx revived him slightly. He looked back to the litter. "The man on the stretcher must be taken to the surgeon immediately," he said with as much force as he could muster. The sentry helped Marcus to the wall and left him slumped there before moving over to the bundle of furs. There was an audible tearing as the coverings were pulled back. Ceyx had been dead long enough for the ice to creep in under the cloak with him. I was left alone when they took Marcus to the infirmary. He followed them on his own feet, but I could tell his spirit was already far away. The sight of his dead friend had overcome his last reserves. I would have followed my master if I could, but one of the soldiers noticed me, and I was dragged away to the kennels. I have never been at home with other hounds. The memories of Appius's fighting pits have never completely left me. At first I was simply too tired to assert myself. I slept a whole day through, but once I had woken and had a meal, it was a different story. The alpha was a heavy male, scarred by the dog handler's goad. We were separated by the bars of our cages, but that hadn't stopped hostility. I yelled as loudly as I could, shaking the bars around me with my fury. For his part, the other hound was throwing himself against the cage, and had even chipped a tooth on the iron between us. I matched my opponent's snarls, but I did not echo his pointless physical displays. Pride prompted me to claim that it was wisdom rather than cowardice that modulated my response. But I cannot deny that I became more wary after the damage to my eye. Some sight had returned to my left side, but the wound would never properly heal. All that wrecked orb admitted were blurred shades of light and shadow. Despite my trepidation at this weakness, I was determined not to show submission. Our screams spread to the other inhabitants of the kennels, and soon the small structure we were housed in reverberated with barks and howls. The kennel master was not pleased. He entered his domain, one hand to his head, growling and cursing as much as the rest of us. I could smell the stale wine on him. "By Juno's cunt, what is all this?" he bawled. The others knew him well enough to rein themselves in, but I was new to the kennels, and I rounded on him, shouting defiance. His eyes narrowed. "So, you're the one who's waking me in the morning, are you?" He kicked at my cage, forcing me back. "You one-eyed wretch! It's the last time you make that mistake, I can promise you that." He pulled down a whip from the wall and crossed over to the cage. I stopped barking and lowered myself, bunching down with my eye on the door behind him. This would not be the first man I had fought. My days of accepting such treatment were done. "Don't you growl at me, Matt. Not unless you want to lose the other eye." He stared at me. "If you were one of mine, I'd finish the job on that thick skull of yours." He reached for the latch, and a heavy-set man with pale hair entered. "I wouldn't open that cage if you value your life," Segmund said. "What?" The kennel master turned to address my master's friend. He raised his hand back to his head as the morning light streamed through the doorway, dazzling him. "What are you doing here? I need no warning. I know my business." "You do not know this dog or his master," Segmund grinned. "Marcus Atratinus is a grim sort. He would never admit to being ruled by his passions. But I wouldn't like to see what he did to you if he saw your marks on Ferox here. And that's if Ferox doesn't end you first." "Foolishness," the kennel master scoffed. "I've dealt with dogs for years. This one was bold enough when I came in, but look at him, practically on his belly in submission." "I'd look again if I were you," Segmund said. "You think he's gone quiet and is just huddled up in the back of his cage, but it's not that simple." The kennel master rubbed his eyes and looked at me with the help of the light from outside. His eyes widened. "You're right. The bastard does mean to go for me," he exclaimed. He reached for the latch. "You tell this Marcus Atratinus, whoever he is, that I'm doing him a favor. This dog needs such nonsense beaten out of him as soon as possible. Better yet, tell him I'll give him his pick of any other dog if he wants me to dispose of this one for him. The brute's half blind and dangerous." Segmund blew out his moustaches. "I'm trying to be friendly about this soldier, but I'll make it an order if you like. Leave the dog alone." The kennel master stiffened, gave Segman another look, then decided to err on the side of caution. "Sir," he said, "please understand I was only offering a better animal and trying to discipline this one." "Understood. Now, if you would please make way, it's the dog I came here for." The kennel master gave Segman a puzzled look, then stepped aside. Segman crossed over to the cage, and I leapt forward as the door opened. "Watch out, sir!" the kennel master cried, raising his whip. But it was too late. I was on Segman before anyone could stop me, forcing him back onto the dirty floor of the kennel. "Get back!" The whip cracked overhead, but I just kept on nuzzling my master's friend and kissing him whenever his flailing hands allowed. I was so grateful to be out of the cage and happy to see Segman, not least because I could smell the meat he'd brought for me. The kennel master quickly calmed down when he heard Segman begin to laugh. "Get off, you oaf!" Segman commanded, at the same time as roughly scratching my chest and throat. I huffed happily and gave him another kiss. Hecate's tits! Who would have imagined anything could smell bad in this room? He made a show of pushing me off, but I knew he would indulge my exuberance for a bit longer. When he got bored, he handed me the bone he'd brought. It had a generous chunk of meat still attached. The moment I received the treat, I remembered the snarling alpha in the cage next to me. I turned and wandered up to his cage, then settled down to gnaw at my prize right in front of him. The alpha's renewed rage and jealousy was palpable, but he knew better than to spoil my meal with the kennel master still there and suffering with a hangover. The meat was tasty. The sauce my jealous adversary provided was richer than any marrow. Segman stood and brushed himself off. He looked down, obviously realizing the effect our tussling had had on his clothes. "I've got meetings in the Principia today, and I have to change, you mongrel." He let me have a couple more crunches on the pork bone before he called me. "Ferox." I cast a glance at the alpha in the cage, then let the mostly chewed bone fall just beyond any hope of him reaching it. I turned and padded after my master's friend. The camp outside was cold compared with the airless confines of the kennels, but there was heat from many fires. The whole area was alive with activity. Everywhere there were disorientating sounds and smells, which I might have found too much if I hadn't had someone to follow. Segman chattered away as if he had no idea that we were walking through Vulcan's forge. "He needs you now, Ferox. He took CX's death hard," Segman was saying. He tussled my ear. "Let's try and do our best to get him back in the saddle in time to ship out with the rest, eh?" The infirmary was in a quieter part of the camp, just behind the main barracks, far away from the clanging and crashing of the technical buildings on the other side. There was a different type of cacophony here. The smells of pungent herbs, the smoke of different incenses, and beneath it all, the subtle, sweet smell of old pus and blood, blended with the sour note of the willow the medics used. "Medicus," Segman called out to a tall man in a white tunic who was leaving the infirmary building with a basket under his arm. "Hmm?" The man looked up. "Ah, yes, he's awake sure enough. Just don't tire him out." His eyes narrowed as he looked at me. "I hope you're not planning to take that beast into my facility." Segman smiled. "I'd never dream of such a thing." He pulled a length of cord from a pocket and tied it around my neck. I forced myself to tolerate the rope and followed when he tugged on the improvised leash. "I assume that it will be all right for me to leave him outside," Segman said. "You may, though I failed to see why you brought the animal here in the first place. You said yourself that my friend's worst wounds were not physical. We all know that a man takes strength from a well-loved pet." The doctor snorted. "If you say so, but I have my doubts. It will be an improvement if you can get him to leave the bed. He slept long enough, in my opinion." Segman watched the doctor disappear, then hurried me through the infirmary door and through a mostly empty ward. He stopped at one of the cots under the window, and I sniffed. Marcus. I needed no urging from Segman to go to him. The rope about my neck went taut for the briefest instant. Then he let me go to my master. Marcus was turned over on his side. He didn't even flinch when I put my head under the blankets, though I could tell by the change in his breathing that he knew I was there. "Good morning, Marcus," Segman said cheerily. "I have brought you a visitor since you don't seem inclined to talk to me." There was no response, but I knew mere words were not enough to reach Marcus. I shifted my position and pressed my face against the small of his back. This time he jerked slightly. My nose was cold from the walk through the camp. "Ferox," I heard the warning in his tone, but I ignored it and kept right on leaning into him. "Ferox, you bastard, lay off," he growled. I rubbed my head against him, ignoring the tenderness on the left side. Marcus rolled over, grasped my ruff, and pulled me back. I ignored his grip and pulled forward, leaving him holding my loose skin as I showered him with kisses. He began to laugh despite himself. "Get off me, you cur," he snarled. His tone told me to renew my efforts. Gods, I'll be the first person to drown in their own hospital bed. Off with you! He gave me another heave and pushed me away. I stood at arm's length, grinning back at him. Your breath comes straight from Pluto's arse, he complained. He looked into my eye and his smile vanished. I'd forgotten for a moment, he whispered. He reached out and I stayed still as his hand disappeared into the dim side of my perception. I felt him explore the edges of my wound. His movements registered as little more than a flickering change in the light. It's okay, boy, his voice soothed me, and he rubbed me behind the ear. Marcus looked up at Segmund. Why have you brought him here? I can't imagine the medicus was well pleased with the idea. Indeed, Ferox shouldn't be here at all, nor should you come to that. A shadow passed over Marcus's face. It's only been a couple of days. I'll be ready to serve soon enough. Perhaps, Segmund replied, but wait too long and the legions will have left without you. I'm not malingering, whatever you think. Did I say so? Segmund asked. It's more a question of whether you make the most of opportunities that will only be available for a short time. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Segmund wagged a finger and took on a stance like a master addressing a slow pupil. Can you really be so dense? At the moment the whole camp is buzzing with the talk of the soldier who came from the other side of the river. The soldier who not only evaded incredible odds, but did it while carrying his comrade on his back. Give it another week and that soldier could quickly be forgotten. Seems reasonable. I did nothing more than run, Marcus said. And as for my comrade, I didn't exactly bring him back, did I? He may have gone to Pluto's realm, but at least he was given the proper rites, and his household gods may welcome him in. Many men here fear being left to haunt the dark marshes beyond the river. At the very least, you spared Ceyx that. Don't say his name, Marcus said. Why not? Segmund shot back. I would think a self-professed Stoic would understand that it will change nothing. Easy for you to say. You ran with the horses, Marcus said bitterly. Segmund looked pained. You seriously think I could have done anything else? Marcus dropped his eyes. No. You did what you had to do. We did our duty by giving you time to get away. You're no doubt the toast of the Principia. Marcus locked eyes with his friend. Just remember Ceyx's death bought you that. Marcus, you know... Segmund's voice was soft. Yes, I know, Marcus responded. I see the logic of the situation, but I still see him, frozen. I don't even know how long I carried his corpse. Segmund sighed. I hear you, Marcus. He paused, searching for the words. But we have no time for this. What? I felt Marcus's hand tighten in my fur. The army will move in days. I will meet with General Silius today, and I know he will ask after you. It is, after all, our information that prompts this early attack. What do I care? Marcus asked. If you report for duty now, it would not take much for me to propose you as a permanent addition to the general's staff. Segmund looked around the infirmary. Or you could stay here and see where they post an extra curo with no official command to return to. You've always been more ambitious for me than I am for myself, Marcus said. And with good reason. We will need men of talent more than ever when we go over the Rhine again. We're going in force, but the Germans know their land well. We don't need to lose more legionaries to treachery or ambush. It's men like you and me that can prevent that. I also thought I'd get Ceyx back alive, Marcus said darkly. You must not dwell on that. Segmund was becoming impatient. No one thought you'd be back, let alone both of you. If you report for duty today, there isn't a man in this camp who would see you as anything but a hero. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Tell me, Segmund, have you been making a living lying for so long that you don't even notice yourself doing it anymore? Segmund blew air through his whiskers. All right, so a few will hate you, but it's the chiefs that matter. You know you have enemies. Would you like to be assigned to Dristanis' squad? The problem with you Stoic types is you're too rigid. You won't bend before breaking. You think I'm broken, Segmund? Marcus asked. If you're not, why are you abed in the infirmary? Marcus snorted. You've always been cleverer than me, Segmund, so I don't expect to win any debate. I've got to ask you a question, though. One Ceyx asked me. Are you really my friend, or do you just ask this of me because you know I'll be of use to you? Segmund sighed. Of course you will be of use, Marcus. No friendship would induce me to recommend you if I didn't believe that. Marcus nodded his understanding. But, Segmund added, I would always be proud to call you friend, regardless of your utility. Marcus opened his mouth to reply, but another voice rung out. What the hell is that dog doing in my hospital? Segmund blanched and looked back towards the entrance to the ward. He quickly slipped the rope over my neck and dragged me away. I was reluctant to go at first, but the sound of pounding footsteps persuaded me that, like Segmund, I did not want to wait around for the incensed doctor. "Think about what I said," Segmund shouted back to Marcus. "Ferox and I will await you outside." "Bloody right you're going outside," the doctor roared. With that we were out of the other door and running. We had to double back through the courtyard, and by the time we were out of the infirmary building, Segmund was panting hard. I'd only just begun to enjoy the run, but Segmund stopped within sight of the infirmary entrance. It seemed an age, but at last my master came out, still stiff-legged, but already looking stronger, sustained by a purpose that had been missing since our return to camp. So we did it again, another dash across the Rhine before the campaign season, before anyone was ready. The chief wanted to make the most of the divisions in the German coalition before the spring melts began. The legions of the Lower Rhine kept the southern tribes busy with an assault of their own while we struck straight for the heart of the enemy's support, the Chatti. Our advance reached all the way to their capital, Mattium, where Varus had last broken bread with those who would betray him. Mattium was just one of many villages that burned. Those few who tried to resist were quickly broken. Our victories were made all the sweeter when Sergestes, Arminius' father-in-law, rejoined the fold and brought with him Arminius' wife and unborn child as hostages. Strategy always meant little to me. What I knew was that we were winning. Our pack drove their pack before them, and the wailing of the lost and wounded became a familiar song in which we all revelled. We returned with little hurt and more laurels, ready to begin the true assault that had always been planned for the summer. Thanks to Segmund's recommendation, my master and I went where the chief went. Unfortunately, that was to mean more time on boats. A convoy left Triactum and took us across Lake Flavo and along the coast to the Eames. I don't know if it was I or the captain of our boat that was more unhappy for me to be there, but I was overjoyed when our force eventually left the river. It was a truly massive undertaking, and when the rest of our troops reached us, we had a force of nearly 80,000 men in the heart of enemy territory. From the rendezvous, our cavalry went south. We would soon receive word that Lucius Stertinus had caught the Bructeri unprepared and recovered the first of our eagles. Germanicus had other priorities. He took us east into the Teutoburg. It was there I had my first true glimpse of what rides the winds between this world and the next.